On my 18th birthday, while my friends were out celebrating at noisy diners and posting glittery cupcakes online, I sat quietly in the back seat of a car I didn't recognize. The air inside smelled like old leather and bitter cologne. My mother hadn't said a word since I got in. Her phone buzzed a few times, and she answered each call with short, clipped sentences. I didn't ask where we were going because I already had a feeling the answer wouldn't be good. Something about her silence, the way she refused to meet my eyes, told me this wasn't a birthday surprise. It was something worse. We drove for over an hour through quiet roads until the city lights faded and gave way to trees and gravel. When we pulled up to a large house with peeling paint and no porch lights, my stomach dropped. I didn't need a reason. I just knew this place wasn't safe. My mother got out first, walking briskly to the front door and knocking 3 times. A tall man opened it. He didn't smile. He didn't even look at me. He handed my mother a thick envelope, and she nodded without saying a word. My throat tightened when she turned back to me and said I should be good, before disappearing into the night without even a hug. That night, I realized I wasn't just visiting. I wasn't staying temporarily. I had been left. Sold. The man, whose name I later learned was Greg, didn't try to hide it. He told me my mother owed him money, and I was the payment. I wasn't even human to them. I was currency. At first, he didn't touch me. He watched. He waited. I heard him walking past my bedroom at night, sometimes pausing outside the door. I learned not to sleep deeply. I stacked chairs under the doorknob. I counted the days, the hours, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. I didn't have a phone. He kept it locked in a drawer. There was no internet. No neighbors close enough to scream for. Just silence, trees, and the sound of footsteps. For weeks, I cooked, cleaned, and followed every unspoken rule to avoid his anger. He never yelled. He didn't have to. His eyes did enough damage. Cold, hard, always calculating. I didn't cry much, not because I wasn't scared or sad, but because crying felt like something a child would do, and I didn't feel like a child anymore. Not after being traded like an old piece of furniture. One morning, I saw a note slipped under my door. Just a few words scribbled on the back of a receipt. Check the basement when he leaves. My heart raced. It wasn't signed. The handwriting was unfamiliar. I didn't know if it was a trap or a lifeline. But the curiosity, the hope that someone might care, burned through the fear. I waited 2 more days until Greg left early in the morning. He said he was going into town. I watched his truck pull down the dirt road before I dared move. The basement door groaned open like it hadn't been used in years. The stairs were steep and dusty, and the light bulb at the bottom flickered weakly. What I found down there wasn't what I expected. There were boxes. Dozens of them. All labeled with names. All belonging to girls. I recognized some of the items. School IDs. Old journals. A few lacy socks and necklaces. It was a collection of lives, like a trophy room. I sifted through one box marked Rachel L. Inside was a pink phone case, a dog-eared book, and a wrinkled letter. The letter was from Rachel's aunt, dated 7 years ago. The words made my chest go tight. We'll keep looking. You'll come home soon. Rachel never came home. I understood then. I wasn't the first. That night I couldn't eat. Greg noticed. His eyes lingered longer than usual, like he was trying to decide whether to punish me or wait. I said I had a headache. He didn't ask questions. But I knew that from now on, I couldn't just survive. I had to escape. The next morning, I returned to the basement. This time, I looked for anything that might explain the connection. Why did he keep all of this? Why hadn't anyone found these girls? In one of the boxes, I found a photo. A faded snapshot of Greg and my mother, years younger, smiling like a perfect couple. My stomach turned. On the back, in blue pen, someone had written, Vegas 2003, Mr. and Mrs. Reardon. Reardon. That wasn't Greg's last name now, but it had been, which meant they had been married. Years before I was even born. My hands went cold. My mother had married this man before. That wasn't a debt she owed. That wasn't a transaction. This was planned. She knew him. She trusted him enough to leave me here, which meant she was part of it. All of it. Every lie, every cold moment, every birthday she forgot, every time she made me feel like I was in the way. It wasn't just neglect. It was grooming. She'd been preparing me for this. I ran back upstairs, locked the door, and sat in the corner with my knees pressed to my chest. My whole life had been a setup. Every time I thought she was just tired, just struggling, just distant, she was actually pulling away from me so it wouldn't hurt when she finally handed me over. But it still hurt. It hurt so much I thought I might split in two. That night, I took the photo and burned it in the bathroom sink. I watched the flames curl around their smiling faces until all that was left was ash and the taste of smoke in the back of my throat. I wasn't going to be the next Rachel. I wasn't going to be a name in a box. But I couldn't just run. He'd find me, and I had no one to run to. No one but maybe the person who left the note. If they were real, if they were still alive. That hope was the only thing keeping me upright. That and the quiet whisper that had started to grow inside me. The one that said I was not a victim. I was a survivor in the making. I just had to play along a little longer, smile a little wider, until I found my way out. Because now I knew the secret. And I would use it to break every chain they ever tried to wrap around me. For the next few days, I played my part like a well-trained actress, keeping my face blank, my voice even, never showing the storm that churned just beneath my skin. Greg didn't suspect anything. He thought I was breaking, not planning. He left his keys on the counter, stopped locking his office, even let me go outside into the yard without watching from the porch. I counted each privilege like a rung on a ladder, each one taking me closer to something that felt like freedom. But I wasn't going to make a run for it in the dark with no direction. I needed a plan, and more importantly, I needed to know who had left that note. So I went back to the basement, this time not just searching boxes, but inspecting every inch of the walls. Behind a dusty shelf, I found something strange. Scratches on the cement floor, a pattern that didn't match the rest. I pushed the shelf aside slowly, my fingers trembling with the effort. Behind it was a door. Not a full-sized one, more like a crawl space. My breath hitched. It had a latch, and when I lifted it, stale air rushed out. Crawling through, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it echo in my ears, I entered a narrow tunnel. It smelled of mold and dirt and old secrets. I kept going until the tunnel widened into a small room, barely enough space to stand upright. And that's where I found her. A girl. Thin, pale, eyes too wide for her face. She looked like she hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. Her hair was matted, her clothes worn thin. She flinched when she saw me. I raised both hands slowly, whispering that I wasn't going to hurt her. She didn't speak at first, just stared like she couldn't believe I was real. Then, in a hoarse voice that cracked like paper, she said her name was Mel. She had been here for over a month. Greg had taken her after a fake job interview. She was 16. My stomach turned, but I kept my face calm. She told me she was the one who wrote the note. She had found an old receipt in a box and slid it under the door the first time she heard footsteps that sounded different from Greg's. She hoped it was someone who could help. I was the first person she'd seen since. I promised I'd come back for her. I didn't say when. I didn't know how, but I meant it. She nodded, a flicker of trust crossing her face. I backed out of the tunnel carefully, replaced the shelf, and spent the rest of the night shaking in my bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many other doors in this house hid people like Mel. The next morning, I tried something risky. I asked Greg about his last name, if he ever went by Reardon. He looked up sharply, his expression tightening like a wire being pulled. He asked where I'd heard that. I shrugged, said I found a picture in one of the drawers, made a joke about how different he looked with a mustache. His face relaxed. Barely. He said that was a long time ago, that he'd left that name behind. People change, he muttered. I nodded like I agreed, but in my head, the puzzle pieces were snapping into place. He had a past he didn't want found. That meant there were records, maybe even a file, a news clipping, something I could use. And if I could find it, I could expose him. I waited until he left again, claiming he was going to the store, and went into his office. The desk was locked, but I'd seen where he kept the key. He thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was. Every movement, every careless habit, every time he reached for something. I opened the drawer and found a folder labeled L. Reardon. I flipped through it quickly, careful not to leave smudges or fingerprints. Inside were documents, old IDs, a marriage license, my mother's name scribbled neatly beside his, and a restraining order. Not from her. From another woman. Her name was Claire Jensen. I didn't recognize it. But she had written a statement. Said he threatened her. Hurt her. That he vanished after a court date. No follow-up.
No arrest.
Just silence. I took photos of every page with the phone I had stolen back from his drawer the night before. I didn't have service, but I knew once I left, I'd have everything I needed. I closed the drawer, locked it, and returned the key. My hands were steady, my breathing slow. Greg came home later that evening, whistling some song I didn't recognize. He brought pizza, something he hadn't done since I arrived. Said it was a treat, that he appreciated how I was settling in. I smiled, took a slice, ate in silence while he watched me like a proud father, like a hunter admiring a caught animal. Every part of me screamed, but I didn't flinch. That night, I slipped back into the basement and gave Mel a piece of bread, a bottle of water, and told her everything. The photo, the documents, the plan. She asked if I was sure. I said no, but I was doing it anyway. The next day, I asked Greg if I could walk to the nearby field, the one he said was safe as long as I didn't go too far. He hesitated but nodded. I took the stolen phone. And I ran. Not toward the woods, not toward the road, but toward the town he thought I didn't know existed, 5 miles away, barely visible on the horizon. I ran until my legs felt like fire, until my lungs screamed, until I reached a gas station and begged for help. The clerk called the police. They came fast. They didn't ask too many questions once I showed them the pictures, the ID, the restraining order. When I told them about Mel, they called for backup. I didn't cry. Not when they wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. Not when they told me I was safe now. I only cried when I saw Mel walk out of that house with the officers, blinking in the daylight, her thin frame hunched against the wind, but still standing. Still breathing. They took Greg away in handcuffs. His face was blank. He didn't speak. My mother was harder to find. She had vanished, of course. Left her apartment, quit her job. But they were looking. I gave them everything I knew. Every address, every phone number, every lie she ever told. I didn't know if they'd catch her. But I hoped they would. Because she was worse than him. He was the monster. But she handed me over to him. And that made her the architect of every wound I carried. I stayed with a foster family for a while, just until things settled. Mel did too. We talked sometimes. Not about what happened, but about everything else. Favorite colors. Dreams. Books. We needed something else to hold on to. Something soft. Something safe. But just when I thought the worst was over, just when the nightmares had started to fade, I got a letter. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a photo. My mother, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. Her arm wrapped around a girl who looked about 12. On the back, it said, "Fresh start. Don't ruin it." My hands trembled. My heart cracked all over again. She wasn't hiding. She was starting over, with someone new. Someone else to groom. Someone else to trade. And I knew then that this wasn't over. Not yet. I stared at the photograph until my eyes burned, the edges of the paper curling under the grip of my trembling fingers. My mother's smile in the image wasn't warm. It was manufactured, pasted on like a mask. The girl beside her stood stiff, uncertain, her hands hanging awkwardly by her sides, not touching my mother's waist even though she was being held close. I flipped the photo back and forth, again and again, hoping I'd somehow miss something. An address, a clue, a mistake. But there was nothing except that cruel, scribbled message, "Fresh start. Don't ruin it." The threat wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It whispered of a new cycle already beginning, of another child being pulled into the same darkness I had just barely escaped from. My stomach twisted, and all the progress I had made, the peace, the therapy, the tentative trust one was learning to build with my foster family, fractured like glass. I had been trying to move forward, but this letter was an anchor, dragging me back down into the ocean of her cruelty. And yet, deep beneath the panic and fear, something steadier started to burn. Anger. Not the wild kind that made you scream into pillows, but the kind that narrowed your eyes and sharpened your focus. I had survived her once. I would not let her do it again. The system was slow. The police said they'd file a report. They said they'd escalate the search, check nearby towns for any signs of my mother. But I could hear it in their voices. They didn't think it was urgent. Not really. They didn't know her like I did. They hadn't lived under her roof, seen the way she calculated every word and gesture, how she manipulated sympathy like a magician. She was a master of disappearing and starting over. A few forged documents, a new alias, and she could be anyone. And that girl, whoever she was, wouldn't even know what was happening until it was too late. I couldn't let that happen. So while the system crawled, I moved. Quietly. Carefully. I pulled together everything I had, every old envelope, every address she'd ever used, every phone number I had memorized growing up, even though she told me not to. I borrowed a laptop from my social worker under the pretense of doing job applications and searched public forums, name change registries, Facebook groups, even missing persons boards. For days I didn't sleep more than a few hours. I drank too much coffee, skipped meals. My foster mom noticed, but I told her I was just adjusting. She didn't press. Then one night, buried deep in a thread on a neighborhood watch forum from a town called Willington, 5 hours away, I saw a post about a new woman in town. Friendly, bit quiet, moved into the old Darson property with a girl around 12. No names. No photos. But something about the way they described her. The way she avoided cameras at the autumn fair, the way she flinched when someone brought up school enrollment, made my chest clench. I packed my bag that night. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I couldn't bear the idea of waiting while someone else's life hung in the balance. I didn't care that I was technically still a ward of the state. I didn't care that leaving without permission could get me in trouble. I had already lived through worse. I took a bus at sunrise, my hands in my pockets, my hoodie pulled low over my face. The ride was long, and the further we got from the city, the more my nerves started to unravel. But the flame in my chest stayed lit. Willington was small, quiet, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone and strangers stuck out like thorns in a bouquet. I wandered through the market, bought a hot chocolate I couldn't finish, and listened. It didn't take long. 2 women near a booth selling handmade candles were chatting. One said, "You seen that new lady on Darson Lane? Strange, how quick she rented that place." My pulse jumped. I waited until they walked off, then followed. Darson Lane was just off the main road, a narrow stretch with overgrown sidewalks and mailboxes sinking into the dirt. I found the house. White paint peeling from the siding. A blue tricycle half buried in the leaves out front. And there she was, my mother, standing on the porch with a broom, her hair shorter now, dyed a darker brown, but still her. Still the same cold angles in her face. The girl peeked from behind the screen door, eyes wide. My breath caught. I didn't approach. Not then. Not yet. I snapped a photo from behind a parked car and backed away slowly. I returned to the bus station and sent the photo to the detective who'd helped with Greg's case. This time, I didn't whisper. I didn't ask politely. I demanded. I told him everything. The photo, the letter, the post. I told him a child's life was in danger. And this time, maybe because of everything I'd done before, he listened. Within a day, a child welfare team was dispatched. Within 2, my mother was in handcuffs. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. But when they led her into the car, she turned and looked right at me, calm and expressionless. Like she knew I would come. Like she had planned for it. That look haunted me more than anything. It wasn't anger or surprise. It was expectation. Like I had only played the part she had written for me years ago. The girl's name was Talia. She didn't speak much. She barely made eye contact. But when they placed her into the custody of the same social worker who had once held my file, I felt something shift. A cycle was broken. My mother was being charged with endangering a minor, conspiracy, and fraud. She'd face prison time. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was hollow. Not because I regretted it, but because I knew the damage she had done could never fully be undone. Not in me. Not in Talia. Not in any of the others. I returned to my foster home days later, different again. More tired. More quiet. But something else too, free. For the first time, really free. No strings pulling in my back. No secrets held like weapons. I had faced the monster and ended the game she started long ago. Or so I thought. Because just as I started to rebuild, a letter came. No return address. Just 4 words in a handwriting I didn't recognize. He wasn't working alone. The letter sat on my desk for nearly an hour before I opened it. My fingers hovered over the edge, my stomach in knots. 4 words. That's all it took to unravel everything I thought was finished. He wasn't working alone. The paper was plain, the writing slanted and deliberate, like whoever wrote it wanted to be understood but not known. I read it over and over, hoping I was imagining things. But the more I stared, the more my instinct screamed. Something deeper had been hidden beneath everything I thought I had uncovered. Greg hadn't been acting alone. And suddenly, the missing pieces started to shift in my mind. The network of names on those boxes in the basement. The way the girls had just vanished. The photo of my mother and Greg's smiling years before I was born. Maybe this wasn't just about me. Maybe it was bigger. Systematic. Planned. My mother wasn't just some desperate woman trying to escape debt. She was part of something far more sinister. Something organized. I started digging again. I called the detective. He told me the investigation into Greg's history had revealed more than they'd expected. Several reports from different states had been filed over the years, each dismissed due to lack of evidence, or in one case, insufficient testimony from a minor. All connected to different names, but always the same pattern. Older men, younger girls, women who claimed to be guardians or distant relatives. My mother had played that role well. But what chilled me most was that in one report, dated 2009, a witness mentioned a woman named Vera, the same name Greg had once accidentally muttered in his sleep when I lived in his house. I hadn't thought anything of it then. But now I realized he hadn't been dreaming. He had been remembering. And Vera wasn't just a name. She was a person. Another piece in their web. I knew what I had to do, but it felt like picking a scab that had barely started to heal. I found a support group online for survivors of trafficking. Not just people who had escaped predators, but those who had been pulled into trafficking by people they knew. Family members. Foster parents. Guardians. I shared my story anonymously. Within a week, someone messaged me privately. Her name was Clara. She was 27, living 2 states over. And she had once been in the same house. Different time. Same Greg. Same photo of him and my mother, only with different names scrawled on the back. She still had her copy. She sent it to me. The handwriting was the same as the one on the envelope I had received. And suddenly I understood. The warning had come from her. She hadn't wanted to scare me. She had wanted to prepare me. Clara told me she believed there were others, men and women, who moved girls from house to house under fake names, shifting them before they could build a trail. Greg was just one handler. My mother was a scout. Vera, whoever she was, might be a recruiter. And there were more. Probably many more. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn every file, every memory, every ghost of what they'd done. But instead, I did something harder. I met with an agent from a federal task force working on trafficking rings. I gave them everything. Names, emails, locations, photos. I shared Clara's story too, with her permission. Together, we started connecting the dots. A loose, fraying net of people who used children like currency and silence like a weapon. As the case opened, so did the floodgates. Survivors began stepping forward. 2 from Florida, 1 from Ohio, one even from Canada. Each had a story eerily similar to mine. Same kind of man. Same kind of woman. Same photo, different years. My hands shook as I read their testimonies, but my heart hardened. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. It took months. I turned 19. Talia turned 13. Mel started therapy and finally enrolled in a GED program. We weren't healed, not fully. Maybe we never would be. But we were rising. Together. Stronger. In court, Greg sat with his shoulders hunched, pale and defiant. He didn't look at me. Not once. My mother was brought in separately, thinner now, her face hollowed out. But her eyes were still the same. Unmoved. Cold. She didn't speak during the trial. She didn't defend herself. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. When the verdict came, it was a blur of clapping, crying, and quiet gasps. Life sentences for Greg. 25 years for my mother. Additional charges pending in multiple states. It was over. Or, at least, this part of it was. I stood outside the courthouse that day and felt the wind cut across my face. It wasn't soft. It wasn't warm. But it was clean. Sharp. Real. And I welcomed it. There was no cinematic ending. No parade. Just quiet relief and the steady beat of life moving forward. I moved into my own apartment a month later. Tiny, old, but mine. I started writing. Not a book, not yet. Just pages. Memories. Truths. I wanted to make sure the stories of girls like me didn't disappear into silence again. That people knew this didn't just happen in movies. It happened in neighborhoods, in schools, behind the smiles of people you trust. One morning, I received a postcard. No name. Just a line scrawled in familiar handwriting. Your voice saved more than just you. I tucked it into a box where I kept things that reminded me of who I was becoming. Not the broken girl in the locked room. Not the pawn passed from hand to hand. But someone who had burned the script they wrote for me and started writing my own. I visit Talia sometimes. She still doesn't talk much, but last week she drew a picture. A girl standing in the rain holding a match, lighting a fire so bright it pushed the clouds back. She handed it to me, without saying a word. I held it like it was gold. Because in her silence, I heard everything. We were not victims anymore. We were the storm they never saw coming. And we were never going back.